So thank you everybody for joining. So what are we actually going to do today on this webinar? So we're going to be deploying a .NET Core, setting up a deployment pipeline to deploy a .NET Core application to AWS. We're going to cover a lot of ground in Octopus. We're not going to go into any advanced subjects in Octopus, but we are going to cover a lot. So we're going to cover how to set up your environment and deployment targets in Octopus. We're going to tell Octopus about your application packages. We're going to set up your project, variables, and deployment processes. We're going to tile that up at the end and create a release and deploy that out to our infrastructure. And then at the end, we're going to create a runbook to manage some of our AWS infrastructure, and also show how to auto deploy to an auto scale group in AWS. And as Matt mentioned, hopefully with some time, answer some questions. So what will we be deploying? We'll be deploying a .NET Core web application called Octo Pet Shop. Octo Pet Shop is a fictitious sample application created by Octopus Deploy. It consists of 3 components. We have a web front end, which is going to display a number of pets from a SQL database. We have a product service API that retrieves data from the SQL server. And we also have a DBUp database package. So if anyone who doesn't know what DBUp is, it's a .NET library that helps you to deploy changes to SQL Server databases. The packages that we're using today were built using Azure DevOps. It'd been great to show that in the webinar, but we've got that much ground to cover with Octopus. We won't have time to show you building those packages. And then we'll deploy the database changes to a Amazon RDS SQL server. We'll be deploying our software. We'll be deploying them to AWS EC2 machines running IIS. And for our production environment, we'll be deploying to an AWS auto-scale group that contains a number of EC2 instances. And like I mentioned before, we'll be deploying our database changes to SQL as a service in AWS. So for anyone who doesn't know what Octopus is or what Octopus does, this is a common CI/CD pipeline that we see. So we have a developer over here checking in some code, making some software better into source control. We have a build server picking up those changes, building the code, running unit tests, creating some artifacts, and then triggering that off to be deployed to development, QA, or prod. Octopus fits in nicely here. So Octopus picks up where the build server finishes, doesn't replace the build server. What will happen with the build server will still build the code, run the unit tests, and create artifacts. Octopus will then pick up those artifacts and deploy that out to your environment. Okay, so I'll do. I'll jump straight into Octopus. So we're going to go from an empty Octopus right the way through to deploying our software out to our infrastructure. And when you first come into Octopus, you're presented with this nice onboarding screen. And it kind of tells us from steps 1 to 4 what we need to do to deploy our software. So you can see here, the first thing we need to create environment and deployment targets, package and upload our software, define our deployment process, and deploy our release. Before I move on, if it is your first time using Octopus and you ever get stuck or you're not sure what screen is which, go over to the question mark at the top right, and you can see we have some help, and this help will change depending on the context of the screen that you're in Octopus. Close that off. So the first thing we need to do in Octopus is tell Octopus about our infrastructure. So we're going to go ahead and create our first environment. So an environment is a logical grouping for our deployment targets. So example will be a development environment. It's going to contain all our development targets, same for a test environment, and same for a production environment. So I'm going to go ahead and create our first environment. Octopus gives us some nice examples. So we have development, test, and production, and that's what we're going to use as our life cycle today. So the first environment we're going to create is development. Hit save. We'll come back, add our test environment, save, and then create our final environment, which is production, and hit save. We go back, you can see we've now got 3 environments with 0 deployment targets in there. So we need to start adding some deployment targets. We can do that by going into deployment targets, add deployment target. So deployment target is our server where we're going to deploy our software. Octopus supports a variety of different deployment targets. So we've got a Windows machine, Linux, Mac, Azure, so it could be an Azure web app, Kubernetes cluster, offline package drop, and cloud region. Because we're deploying to Windows EC2 instances running IIS, we're going to be using Windows targets today. And to deploy to a Windows target, we need to install what's called a tentacle. This is a lightweight agent that gets installed on your deployment target, and it can run in 2 modes, polling and listing. So the difference between the two, a polling target will poll the Octopus server for tasks, whereas a listing tentacle will passively listen for tasks and push jobs to the deployment target. One thing to note with both listing and polling. So polling, you only have to open outbound traffic on the deployment target, whereas listing you would have to open an inbound firewall on the deployment target. Today we're going to use listing tentacle. So I'm going to go ahead and hit add. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to open up my AWS. I'm going to my EC2 instances that I have ready. I'm just going to find. So I have 3 machines here: Octo, Pet Shop, Web Dev, Test, and Jump. You notice we haven't got a production machine just yet, and we'll take care of that in just a second. But we do have a Octo Pet Shop Jump. So what that is, it's going to be our jump box for deploying our database package to. So when we deploy our database package, we're going to run that from the jump box rather than the web test boxes for our website. So we go ahead, and the first thing we need to do when we create a listing tentacle is we need to install the agent on our machine. And we also need this thumbprint. This thumbprint is going to be used to establish trust between the Octopus server and the deployment target. I'm going to go ahead and open up IDP session to my dev web box. So I've already installed the tentacle manager. So I just need to configure this for a listening tentacle. I'm going to go ahead and select listening tentacle. Storage, where Octopus is going to store its logs and applications. Next, default port for listening tentacle is 109.3.3, so we'll leave that as default, and it wants the Octopus thumbprint. Go ahead, hit next, and install. So this now should be ready for me to discover back in the Octopus UI once this is finished. Cool, that's finished. See, that's now running. Then minimize that. All I'm going to do is go get the DNS of that box and hit next. So now we can see we've got the tentacle. Now it just gives Octopus Deploy some more information about this deployment target. So the first thing we need to do is give it a display name. Always be as descriptive as possible here, because as you have more and more machines, you want to be able to find them easily. So I always go with the application I'm deploying, which is Octo Pet Shop. Now, The web boxes are going to be used to host the web front end and my API product service. So what I'm going to do is do web / API. I'll also put on this is my development machine. Next, we need to select an environment. So we create our environments earlier, and this is going to be part of my development environment. And next, we want a target role. So a target role is really important. So when we're filling out our deployment process, we're going to be adding multiple steps to deploy different parts of the application. So we need to tell Octopus what machine this will be used for. So we just to make sure that we deploy the right piece of software to the right machines. So this is going to be used for deploying my web front end and API. So I'm going to go with Octo Pet Shop Web. Also Octo Pet Shop API. Spell that right. And some information here, the communication, the thumbprint, and the tentacle URL. I'm happy with that. Go ahead and hit save. Okay, we've got another one for our test box. Same again, listing tentacle. We get the DNS of our test box from AWS and place that in there. We don't need to install the agent or configure the agent again because I've already done this before I started the webinar. Hit next. Again, we need a display name, much of the same as the last one. Octo Pet Shop Web API test. Different environment this time. This is going to sit in my test environment. It's going to have the same roles. It's going to be doing the same job, but just in a different environment. And hit save. And then I need to add one for production. But I'm going to leave that for just a second. What I'm going to do first is set up a tentacle for my jump box. The DNS again, so that, hit next. Again, we need a display name for the jump box. So this can be responsible for running my database changes. So call this database runner. So I can put a space there. And the environment this is going to be used for, I'm going to use this for all three environments. So whether I'm deploying to development, test, or production, I want this box to actually run the changes for all environments. You probably wouldn't do this in the real world. You probably have one for development, one for test, and one for production. Or one for development and test, and one for production. I have a different role this time. So I'm going to go Octo Pet Shop DB runner and hit save. Cool. So we've got our listing tentacles for our web and API boxes for development and test, and one for our database runner. However, we don't have one for production. So what I'm going to do, go back into AWS. I've created an auto scale group for today. So all my production instances are going to run in this auto scale group. I go into there. And I'm going to change the capacity. So at the moment, I've got a maximum capacity of 3. So I have 3 EC2 instances running in this auto scale group. I'm going to change that to 1. What's going to happen? AWS is going to kick off this launch template, Octopus Webinar 101 template. It's going to set up the EC2 instance. What it's going to do is, once it's finished building the EC2, it's going to run this script for me, which installs some components to make my application work, which is IIS, .NET Core. It's going to install the Octopus Deploy tentacle using Chocolatey. It's then going to register the tentacle with the server. I'll get rid of that. So that's going to take a couple of minutes to run through. So what we're going to do is jump back to the dashboard, and we'll carry on with the onboarding guide while that actually registers as a target. So next, we need to upload our software. So we've got a couple of packages that we need to deploy. And first of all, Octopus comes with a built-in package repository. This accepts NuGet packages, zips, tar, gzip, jar, and rar files, or packages, should I say. If you didn't want to use the built-in package repository from Octopus, you can add an external feed. So you've got different feed types here. So you've got obviously a NuGet feed, Maven, Helm, Git repository feed. So if you have one of these feeds already that you have all your packages in, you can use that and pull packages into Octopus and then deploy those. But today, we're going to use the built-in package repository. And before we add any packages, we can see here we've got a couple of helpers on Octopus, how to create packages, how to push packages. So I give some nice examples on how to create packages for ASP.NET manually through the command line build server. Same with ASP.NET Core, .NET, Java, Node.js. We can do these manually, but on the tab here, we've got build server. So we have a number of different build servers. You can install Octopus steps that will package your application and push your packages to Octopus, so making it a little bit easier. Go ahead and close that. I'll get a little helper on how to push packages too. So you can push them through the NuGet client, PowerShell, and curl. Some nice examples there. But again, if you're using a build server, like let's say, for example, such as TeamCity as your DevOps or Jenkins, there are steps in there to push the packages straight into Octopus without you having to do any of this. Close that off. Next, so what we're going to do is I've already got the packages built and we're going to upload them manually. So I go in and find my packages. So we have 3 packages: database package, product service API, and web. So I want to upload the database package first. Give that a second. And I'll upload second package, which is my product service API. You can see there we've got the name of the package and the version and the extension, NuGet package. And we'll load the final package, which is the web front end. Cool. So we have all our packages there now. Let's go check. See there, Auto Pet Shop database, product service, and web, and the version numbers. I go back to dashboard. I'm going to take on package and upload our software. I'll double check to see if our production. Yep, so we can see our production web API box has now been registered. That's cool. Go back to dashboard. And we can see here now it wants to define our deployment process. So I'm going to go ahead and create our first project. So a project in Octopus is a collection of deployment steps, variables, all your packages and assets that you're going to use to actually deploy your software to the infrastructure. So we're going to add our first project. Normally this is going to be your application name. So we're going to go with Octo Pet Shop and save. So we're now ready to start defining our deployment process and all our steps to deploy our packages to the infrastructure that we've set up. But before we do that, we want to go into variables. So variables are really handy for replacing values in configuration files. So we all have these configuration files of our applications. The best example I can think of, if we've got a web config and inside there you have a connection string, that connection string is going to change from environment to environment. So as you deploy to dev, test, and production, you're going to have a different connection string. And rather than manually hard coding these values into the configuration file, and we can do this through Octopus. So what I want to do is show you a couple of examples. So it's going to open up the Octo web package. So this is the package that we've uploaded and we're going to deploy today. So we can see here we've got app settings.json file. And we can see these values here under app settings, app version, environment name, product service based URL. I want to swap these out as I deploy different versions and to different environments. And if I open up the product service package, we can see here we've got connection strings, OPS connection string, and a server connection string. I want to change this as I deploy to different environments. So let's minimize those out. First variable I want to replace. Let's go back to. So I go back. We can see here in this JSON we've got app settings and app version. Now to reference this in Octopus Deploy, right, simple is we have app settings colon app version. I want to replace this with what's called an Octopus system variable. So Octopus comes with a number of system variables that you can use to replace these values. So the one that I'm going to use is Octopus release number. So when I create a release in Octopus, it's going to fill this variable in with the release number I've chosen. And the syntax for this variable is hashtag open curly brace Octopus release number. That's that one done. I can add that to the list. Next one was environment name. So app settings environment name. Again, I'm going to use a inbuilt system variable from Octopus. So hashtag open curly brace Octopus dot environment name. For some reason that's one I always spell wrong, so I'm double check that. Close that off. So as we deploy to different environments, this value will be represented by the environment that we're deploying to. Next was the product service based URL. So the value for this in my setup, because I am running the product, so the web front end and the product API on the same machine, it's going to be HTTP localhost. Run it off a different port, run it off port 821. That's the list. Cool. So the next thing, we want to replace our connection string. So we've got a value here. The name is connection string, colon, OPS connection string. And I've got the connection string here for my SQL Server. What I'm going to do is open the editor, make this a little bit larger, paste these in. So you can see here, this is a SQL connection string. What you can see though, the values for our server has been replaced with this little placeholder of Octo Pet Shop database server. We need to create these variables in Octopus and replace them with actual values. We can see the same with database name. We can see with database user, and lastly, database password. So I'll just paste that again. There we go. I'm going to hit done. So we need to create variables for each one of these values. So the first one was Octo Pet Shop database. Wrong one. So we'll type that out. Octo Pet Shop database server. And the value for that, this is the server running in AWS. Add that to the list. I am using the same database server for all three environments. Again, you probably wouldn't do that in the real world. You probably have one for dev and test, one for production. Of this webinar, it's okay. Next was Octo Pet Shop database name. And for this, I do have a different name for each environment. So it's Octo Pet Shop.dev. And because each one is different for each environment, all I do is add another value. And what I'll do is copy that. I'll get that as test. And then finally, prod. Excellent. However, so I now need to tell Octopus, I need to define a scope on each of these values. So with variables and values, you can define a scope in Octopus on channels, deployment steps, processes, targets, target roles, and environments. We're going to use environment today. So Octo Pet Shop dev value for my development environment, test for test, and prod for production. Add that to the list. The last two variables is we've got Octo Pet Shop database user, a simple user today, admin, that's the list, and lastly, pet shop database password. Now, rather than typing this out as plain text, it's a nice little feature to highlight. We can change the type of value. So we've got a Azure account, AWS account, certificate, workable, but the one that makes most sense today is sensitive. So I just type sensitive. Just start like him. It's going to be hashed out. And when I save these values into the database, it will be encrypted and only decrypted during deployment time. Let's make sure they're okay. And that's the variables section done. That's the list and save. No. Excellent. So now we've got our variables done, we can start building out our deployment pipeline. I'm going to go to process and I'm going to add our first step. So Octopus comes with a number of different steps that you can use to deploy your software. The first step I want to use is I want to ensure that when I deploy to production for the first time, I get approval from another team. And we can use a manual intervention step to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and start typing manual. We can see here we've got an installed step template called manual intervention. I'm going to add that. And first thing it's asking for is a step name. And I say get till approve deployment. It's going to ask us some instructions. Please approve my deployment. So essentially asking the team that I'm going to send this to some instructions. It wants to know the team that's going to be responsible for actioning this approval. I'm going to say Octopus administrators. And just a quick heads up, I am part of the Octopus administrators, so I am going to approve my own deployment today. And lastly, we have conditions. I only want this to run for production. I don't really care about dev and test, but I do care when the production deployment goes ahead. So first one, go to conditions, environments, and run for only specific environments. And I say production. And also, another run condition. So a run condition, so this is only going to run at the moment when the previous step succeeds. So I'm going to add something in here, which is a run condition. It's a variable run condition. I'm going to add this. We'll talk a little bit later about this. However, it's all to do with the auto-scaling groups that I'm going to do at the end. And I only want this to run when a human has actually triggered the deployment and not by an Octopus trigger. But that'll become more clear as we move forward. Okay, hit save. Next, I want to add a step to deploy our database package. So I'm going to go into the package category and deploy a package. I call this deploy database changes. Target roles. So now it wants to know which machines it should run this on. Remember, we created the Octo Pet Shop database runner. So let's set that role. So that's going to ask for a package. We uploaded the Octo Pet Shop database package earlier. And some other options on this package step. We can leave these as default. There is one feature that I want to show you, which is custom deployment scripts. So what I do is just load up the database package. It's a little bigger. So you can see this is the database package that I've uploaded. You can see this Octo Pet Shop database exe. We want to trigger this exe off, which is going to run in the database schema changes. What you'll notice in here, we have a deploy.ps1 script. And if I just minimize that, go back up to custom deployment scripts. With this feature, you can run scripts pre-deployment, during deployment, and a post-deployment script. We don't need to actually run any script to trigger that exe off because of the just hold that back up. Because of the deploy.ps1 script, Octopus recognizes this naming convention of deploy that it's going to run during deployment. I'll just quickly show you the script so you know what it's actually doing. So I've got a connection string here, and it's loading that from our variables, which is connection strings OPS connection string, and it's just going to trigger off the Octopus database.exe. Cool. That. I'll turn off those custom deploy scripts and OK, and hit save. So now we need to add a step to deploy our product service API to IIS. I'm going to use deploy to IIS. Give that a name. Target roles. So again, we want to run this on any machine that's got the Octopus Shop API role. Package ID, product service. Now we get some features for deploying to IIS. To configure the type of deployment, we're going to go with an IIS website. It's going to ask for a website name. So I'll go Octopus Shop API. It's going to ask where I want to install the package. I'm going to leave this as the Octopus package directory. It's going to ask for the application pool name. Octopus Shop API. It's going to ask for a binding. We want to change this. So as I remember telling you earlier, I'm running the website and product API on the same machine. So I'm going to just run the API for different ports. So I'm going to change that from port 80 to port 81. And I'm also going to enable anonymous authentication. I've got some other options down here regarding variables and transforms. What we do need to enable is what's called JSON configuration variables. And hit OK. So we've created the variables to swap out the values in our app settings JSON, but we also need to tell Octopus about these files. So the file that we want to replace settings in is settings.json. Double check that. Okay, and hit save. And then lastly, we need to add another step to deploy our website to IIS. So deploy website. Target role is going to be our Octopus Pet Shop web. Package, Octopus Pet Shop web again. And again, these are going to be pretty similar. IIS website. We have a different name for this website. So Pet Shop web. I'll copy that. Same with the application pool. Obviously, with the application pool here, you can change other settings on the user that it runs as. We can leave it as application pool identity. Don't need to change the bindings this time because I want the website to run on port 80. I am going to enable anonymous authentication. And again, I'm going to enable JSON configuration variables. So I need to instruct Octopus to replace values in the app settings of this package. Cool. And hit save. So now we have all our steps to deploy our application. So we've got our deploy database changes, deploy product API, and deploy website. So I'm going to go ahead and create a release. So I'm going to create a release now. We can see here all the different packages it's going to use. We've only got one package at the moment, 2020 07 20.2 for database, product, service, and web. It wants a version number. What I want to do is just use the package number. So I'm going to type this out manually. You can get Octopus to get the version number from package step automatically. We'll just do it manually for now. 7. Cool. I'm going to hit save. So now we've created our release. What's just happened there is Octopus is taking a snapshot of the deployment process and all the steps. It's also taking a snapshot of the variables. So if anyone changes the variables or deployment process, it won't actually affect this release. If you do change the variables and you want it to affect this release, you can come in here into releases and actually update the variables. So if I did a show snapshot, there are our variables. We've come in and just update the variables. And we don't actually need to do that now. What we can see up here is the life cycle. So the first thing we need to do is deploy to development. Then we'll be able to deploy to test, then to production. So let's go ahead and do that. And deploy to development. We get a couple of options. So first of all, it's telling us the environment we're deploying to. When do you want to do it? You want to do it now or later? You can set a time. We're going to do it now. We can exclude steps. It's kind of failure mode. The deployment will run in. So we can also see a preview and customize a preview of steps that are going to run on each machine. We can also see the deployment targets and include or exclude particular deployment targets. All looks good. I'm going to go ahead and hit deploy. So what's going to happen now? I'm just going to start running through all those steps and deploy our software out to our infrastructure. Well, the first thing I'm just going to do, it always automatically includes this acquire packages step. And that's potentially pushing packages from the Octopus server to the deployment targets. Next is going to run my deployed database changes, which is now completed successfully. If we go into task log, it gives us some additional information. It's deploying our product API into IIS. You can see here, it's checking the binding, it's signed the binding of 81. That gives you a whole host of information about what's going on, and that's finished. It's also deployed our website, and what we can see here now, we've completed our first deployment to development, and we have this nice little "You've made it" badge down here. If it is instructing to complete a short feedback form, if you do get to this point, I dare you to complete it, and we will send you a pack of stickers. Close that. What I do before checking this website is up and running, I'm going to deploy to the test environment. What I'm going to do is go to my EC2 instance. Go into that. So that's the webbox, devbox I deployed to. I get a DNS, and hopefully we should see a nice pet shop application. Excellent. So you can see that's up and running. You can see the version is 2020.07.20, and it's running in development. So we can see the variable replacement that we instructed on the JSON app settings file has worked correctly. Close that. Go back in. Now we can see the test is still deploying. So we've deployed the product API, and it's completed the website deployment. Let's go ahead, deploy that to production. Can we go back? Let's double check test. Let's make sure it's up and running. Cool. You can see that version, same version, however, it's now running in test. Cool. Let's go back. So you can see now it's deployed to production. However, it's a little bit different from development and test. If you remember, we create the manual intervention step, and we set that to only run for production. So it's halted the deployment. I'm going to assign this to me. I'm going to say, okay, to deploy and proceed. In real world, that would go to you may have an initial step that sends an email or a Slack message to another team. Another team will, maybe a release management team, would then actually approve that deployment. Now I've approved the deployment. It's going to start acquiring the packages again and run through steps 2 to 4. Okay. Say it's push the packages. I'm going to do the database changes. It's going to apply our product API. You can see there it's performing the JSON variable replacement on our app settings. It should be done in just a second. Okay, that's now completed. It's going to deploy the final part, which is our website. And hopefully we should have our application deployed to development, test, and production. Excellent. So I'll go back to overview. You see that's now deployed to development, test, and production. What we'll do, this is the machine that was spun up as part of the Autoscale group. Go ahead, just double check that's working. Excellent. We can see that version 2020 running in production. So cool. So we've deployed our application out to development, test, and production. So we're actually using an Autoscale group for our production EC2 instances. And this is the common question that we get. Okay, so if we add a second EC2 instance to our Autoscale group, how do we get the latest production software deployed onto that EC2 machine? So I'm going to take you through and show you how to do that. But first, we're going to use a runbook to actually change the capacity in our Autoscale group. So first, what I need to do is create a couple of variables. One for our account, our AWS account, and one for our AWS region. These will come more clear in a second. I'm going to create one project. .aws.account, and the value for this, I change the type. I'm going to use AWS account. Now, before I start the webinar, I created a AWS account in our infrastructure, so you can store cloud credentials for AWS and Azure in Octopus. Then you can use those as part of steps that interact with those cloud services. I'm going to choose my AWS account. Hit done. Add to list. And then I'm also going to create one for the AWS region I'm using. Value for that is 2. And add that to the list. And hit save. So now what I do is create a runbook to actually change the capacity size in my Autoscale group. So I just jump back into my Autoscale group. You can see, I mentioned at the start, at the moment, desired capacity is 1. We've got a minimum of 0 and maximum of 3. What I do is build a runbook to actually change this desired capacity to 2. So a runbook in Octopus can be used to automate routine or emergency operations, manage your cloud infrastructure, such as what we're going to do now, or it could be a case of deploying cloud formation templates, templates, and building your infrastructure. You may ask, okay, why don't you just change the desired capacity in the EC2 management console? That's great. And the reason why, not everybody has access to the EC2 management console. And giving people the ability to do this via a runbook that we control with permissions is a lot safer and more secure way of giving people access to cloud services or managed cloud services rather than administrative access to the console. So All I do is add my first runbook, and I'm going to call this change desired capacity auto scale group. Hit save. And I'll go into process. And again, much like the deployment process, we're going to add a step. And this time, what I'm going to use is an AWS run AWS CLI script step. I'll give it a step name, change capacity. Yep. I'll run this on the Octopus server. So this is the AWS CLI script step. First thing it wants is a AWS account to connect to AWS. We created that as a variable, project AWS account, and also the region. If I just click insert variable, I type in projects, we can see the variable that I created a couple of minutes ago. And now wants this a script to run. So I've got a script here. I'll make it a little bit bigger. For the script, it's just setting the desired, it's an AWS CLI script, that's setting desired capacity on an auto scale group. So I need the scaling group name. I'll grab that. And it also wants a desired capacity. I'll change that to 2. Minimize that. We can make this better by creating this into an actual step template, make it more reusable. But it might be nice just to show the scripts that we're using to actually change the capacity. Go ahead and hit save. And we're going to run that, and hopefully we'll see a change in the capacity of my auto scale group. Excellent. So that should have gone. So I just refresh this page. So it's gone from 1 to 2. So what's going to happen now? Octopus is going to kick off this launch template. It's going to run the scripts that I showed you earlier to install IIS and the register a tentacle. And what we'll see shortly is a new target be registered in the Octopus infrastructure. However, what we do need to do is actually create a trigger. So how do we instruct Octopus to deploy software automatically to new machines that come online? So if we go into triggers, Octopus comes with 2 types of triggers. We have deployment target trigger and a scheduled trigger. We've got a scheduled trigger where we can say, we can give a particular time to actually deploy our software from one environment to another. We can specify which days the deployment runs on, interval and start time. However, because it's an auto-scaling group, we don't know when these machines are going to get added. So go back to triggers, and what we're going to do is create a deployment target trigger. So a deployment target trigger is a trigger is a reaction to an event that happens in Octopus. So you can see down here, event filters. So I've got an event group here is when a machine becomes available for deployment. So when the EC2 instance finishes spinning up and it's registered a tentacle, that will register an event that a machine has became available for deployment. So we're going to fill out this event trigger. Auto deploy production release. I'll give this a description, pretty much the same. So scale groups. The event filters. When a machine becomes available for deployment, and we can see the events that it includes: machine enabled, machine found healthy, machine found to have warnings. It's going to ask us for the environment. I'm going to say all we do is for production. It'll also ask whoever we want to redeploy to existing targets. We don't want to do that. We just want to update to the new. We want to deploy to the new EC2 instances, and hit save. So when the new machine comes online, it will trigger off this trigger, and it should deploy our software to the new EC2 instance. However, what you remember as well is we created the deployment. When we created the deployment process, we created the approved deployment, and what I did, I put a run condition to only run when it's not been triggered, when the deployment has not been kicked off by a trigger. So when a deployment is kicked off by the trigger, it won't actually implement this step. It'll only implement this step when it's been deployed manually by a human in the UI. If I go to tasks. Oh, we've got a failure on there. I'll just double check that again. Okay, 1 second. Why is it? Okay, 1 second. Got the tentacle. So it's just found unhealthy. Let's just check that again. There we go. I'm not sure what happened there. And then what will happen now? Total Pet Shop should now trigger off our production deployment. So because the machine was found healthy, it's kicked off deployment to production. We can see it skipped the approved deployment step because it's been triggered by it's been kicked off by the trigger. It's not run the database deployment changes because we didn't want to deploy the same packages, and that's already been deployed. What it will do is deploy the product API and deploy the website. I'll do in anticipation of that working. I'll just go check the instance of that. Oh, it's the same one. Let's double check the, for instance. There we go. Go back to deploy. See, it's deployed the API. And let's go now deploy the website. Excellent. If I just jump to that. Excellent. You can see that's now up and running in production. We had a slight tick up with the health check. I think it was just a little bit too quick. But we can see there, we've added a machine to an autoscale group. The instance has been created, and Octopus is automatically deployed at the latest version in production to that instance. And that wraps up the webinar part of the demo part of the webinar, Mark. I'll hand over to you to see if you have any questions.
Thanks, Adam. That was a really great run through of deploying an application into AWS. I really liked the way you created the runbook there to manage the AWS autoscale group too. That's really cool. So yeah, we're a little bit short on time, so I've got a couple of questions for you, and then any other questions maybe we can, if you just send them to advice@octopus.com and we can answer them for you there. So we've got one in our Zoom Q&A is, can the variable name app settings app version also be applied to an app.config or web.config? So where you use the JSON settings, in this example, can you use it for XML configuration?
You certainly can, yes. I'm going to try and show an example. Excuse me. So yeah, so you've got configuration variable. It will place any entries inside any .config files. That could be an app setting or web.config. Yeah, it'll certainly do that.
Excellent. Yeah, we're getting some other questions in now. So there's one that says, do you show how to deploy from TFS? So we don't do that on this webinar, but we do have a another webinar where I think we go through that and ADO, don't we?
Yes, I think we do. I think there's some that we have on our YouTube channel that show you how to deploy from ADO.
Excellent. Let me just see. I think there's one in our chat as well. Oh, where did that go? There's another question which is, how will Azure DevOps deliver the package to Octopus? So how can you use Azure DevOps to get packages to Octopus?
I can give you a quick example of that. Let's see if I can hold that up. Give you a second. So we've got steps in Azure DevOps. We can see a package here to package up my web application and product service. And then we have some steps to push the package to Octopus, and also a step to push build information to Octopus as well.
Excellent. Cool. Let me just see if there's any others. So one question is, in case of the auto deployment, the manual approval step that you set up, will it run given the run condition variable you have set up? So will it run when a human runs it and then not when an auto deployment triggers it?
That's right, yes. So I did that. So with the run condition, if a trigger kicks off a deployment, it won't run that step. If I triggered that manually through the UI, it would run that step.
Excellent. Yeah, that's cool. Right, I think we're going to have to stop there with the questions, but we'll try and answer some of those after the webinar.
Yeah, I'll be online. I'll be online after if anyone wants to fire any more questions in the Slack channel. I'll hang about and try and get those answered.
Excellent. Cool. Thanks for that, Adam. Cool. So as we mentioned at the start, we are recording this webinar and we'll send this out in the next 24 to 48 hours. That'll include some links to the resources that Adam has used in today's session. Adam, thanks again for that run through. It was great. Thank you to everybody who joined us as well. One final thing from me. We have details of all of our upcoming events and webinars on octopus.com/events. The next two we've got coming up on the 29th of July, we'll be seeing how you can automate your infrastructure and applications with Operation Runbooks and Chocolatey. That's with Derek Campbell and Paul Broadwith from Chocolatey. And then on the 5th of August, we'll be talking about Octopus's next release, 2020.3. And in this webinar, Leanne and Ryan will talk through some of the new features and updates in that release. So lots of great topics coming up, and hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you, everyone.